Raising up our voice for unity. Here in the now, I am hearing the now as I listen, and I listen, and I listen. The sound that goes on, goes on. Can you hear? Can you hear? In the here and now, here and now. Hear the song of the earth should be singing in the side, in the side, in the circle, in the circle, in the circle round with the sound that carries the ancient memory constantly, gracefully. Calling us to heal now, stewards are we from the inner world to the world we see. Raising up our voice for unity. Here in the now, I am hearing the now as I listen, and 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 I listen.
Hello Internet, once again, it's your soul, and just a quick video to give a little report on a new publication that's appeared on the Lancet, which is Britain's allegedly most prestigious medical journal. And typically, if something gets published in the Lancet, it tends to have some weight with a lot of people who otherwise would ignore a lot of other sources. Personally, I don't really tend to ignore any published sources of science. I just take them for what they are. I tend to find, I mean, I'm not the world's most experienced academic or research scientist. I'm not trained professionally to do that, but I am trained to think and use logic, and so therefore, like anybody, you know, I can look these things over and reach conclusions. So yeah, I tend to just sort of look at everything and assess it based on its own merits, rather than saying, oh, it came from this source, so therefore I'm not paying attention to it. However, what we've got here is on the Lancet. I'm going to show you a screen capture of it here. So this is titled Planetary Electromagnetic Pollution. It is time to assess its impact. And this is from a regular publication that I haven't seen before. It's not. This isn't actually a study. This is, as I understand it, a kind of drawing together of data from various sources into, I suppose it's not too dissimilar from a blog, but it's a scientific kind of blog, I guess. So, I mean, let's just read it. As the Planetary Health Alliance moves forward after a productive second annual meeting, a discussion on the rapid global proliferation of artificial electromagnetic fields would now be apt. The most notable is the blanket of radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, largely microwave radiation, generated for wireless communication and surveillance technologies, as mounting scientific evidence suggests that prolonged exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic radiation has serious biological and health effects. So this is something that I've been covering for a very long time, and I've spoken to several professionals in the field. I've used some equipment to measure these types of things, and I was really shocked to find how many fields there are. Even when you're in the countryside and you think there aren't any, you are literally being swamped by signals. You have no idea that they're there until you measure them. You don't know where they're coming from. And you know, if you go into somewhere like central London, it's just off the charts. You're getting hit by hundreds and hundreds of different signals constantly. And when people say, "Oh, this is all being debunked. There's no evidence to show that these fields do any harm," well, that's wrong. Basically, there's lots of studies that show they do harm, and in fact, I've got leaked documents going from the military. I think it's US military, going back to 1960s, 1970s, where they knew that these things were doing harm back then. These kinds of fields, and they. Basically, this information wasn't released to the public at the time because it was classed as top secret for microwave weapons research, and you know, it's considered to be, you know, potentially dangerous information that they didn't want to be threatened by in the hands of their opponents. So this has been known for a long time, and if we carry on reading here, public exposure regulations in most countries continue to be based on the guidelines of the International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection and Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, which were established in the 1990s on the belief that only acute thermal effects are hazardous. So in other words, they tested to find out whether microwave technology cooked your brain and cooked your body, because it was known that microwaves could be used to cook things. And they said, oh, well, you know, mobile phones and so on, they don't cook your brain, they don't heat your tissues sufficiently to do damage due to heat, so therefore they're safe. It's a bit of a sweeping judgment there. And since then it's been shown to have been an incorrect assumption. So prevention of tissue heating by radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation is now proven to be ineffective in preventing biochemical and physiological interference. For example, acute non-thermal exposure has been shown to alter human brain metabolism by NIH scientists, electrical activity in the brain, and systemic immune responses. Chronic exposure has been associated with increased oxidative stress and DNA damage, and cancer risk. Laboratory studies, including large rodent studies by the US National Toxicology Program and Ramazzini Institute of Italy, confirm these biological and health effects in vivo. As we address the threats to human health from the changing environmental conditions due to human activity, the increasing exposure to artificial electromagnetic radiation needs to be included in this discussion. Due to the exponential increase in the use of wireless personal communication devices, e.g. mobile or cordless phones and Wi-Fi or Bluetooth-enabled devices, and the infrastructure facilitating them, levels of exposure to radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation around the 1 GHz frequency band, which is mostly used for modern wireless communications, have increased from extremely low natural levels by about 10 to the power of 18 times. Radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation is also used for radar, security scanners, smart meters, and medical equipment, MRI, diathermy, and radiofrequency ablation. It is plausibly the most rapidly increasing anthropogenic environmental exposure since the mid-20th century, and levels will surge considerably again as technologies like the Internet of Things and 5G add millions more radiofrequency transmitters around us. So it says here, the diagram is a typical maximum daily exposure to radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation from man-made and natural power flux densities in comparison with International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection Safety Guidelines. And you can see here that these different colours represent different measurements from different time periods, and the green one would effectively be really before humans were here. So in other words, with no human interference, we would have this green level here, and it's relatively low, going up higher towards the lower end of the frequency and at the top end, and less in the middle. And in the 1950s, when we have a certain amount of technology but not really so much wireless stuff, there's a bit of a gain here across the board, but it's not dramatic. And then 1980s, things start to get pretty extreme. I mean, that's already double on that end, almost double on that end, and probably 10 times maybe, or 8 times, or probably more than 10 times, 15 times in the middle. And then now it's just ridiculous. I mean, these lines up here, I'm not particularly familiar with these measurements, but they're basically saying that they're safety guideline levels depending on different environmental situations. So for example, it's got here public peak, so that would presumably be the top end of what's possibly safe, and presumably public would be like normal low safe level. Then occupational peak, in presumably that means in the workplace, which is a little bit higher, for maybe because people are only there a certain amount of time, I don't know. But yeah, so we can see here clearly that in the last, well, this is probably even higher now because it's 2010s, okay, so maybe this is a modern measurement. But we can see that in the central region around 1 gigahertz, this is actually reaching safety levels, and this is constant. And depending on where you are, this could even be higher than that. If you're in a city like London, for example, I'm sure there's a good chance this will be higher. So basically, we're already at the point where, even conservative measurements, I would say, show that we're likely to start experiencing massive, serious problems as a result of this. I'd say we already are experiencing serious problems as a result of this. If you look at the rate of cancers increasing massively, and people are wondering, in the last few decades, I'm wondering, why would that be? It's maybe we're just detecting it quicker. No, that's not true at all. The scientific data shows, yes, it is being detected better, but it's still massively increasing. So, it doesn't take a genius to start to look at this and say, well, hang on a minute, the scientific studies say that this is connected to cancer and DNA damage. There's quite a few studies that claim that it's not, but then you have to look at who's funded those things. And it's not enough to just look at 1 or 2 studies. If you've got a wealth of studies showing that these things are connected to cancer and DNA damage, then we need to be not just ignoring it at the very least. We need to be taking this seriously. I personally smashed my mobile phone years ago, and I've only recently, in the last not so long, inherited one, which I very rarely use. But we don't have Wi-Fi in the house. Everything's hardwired. Basically, I live in the countryside, so I do my best to stay away from all this stuff, and I have to say I do feel better as a result. If I go into nature and I sit by a river with no technology around, it's obvious to me. I can feel the field difference. I can literally feel the electromagnetic field. I can feel the difference. No one can tell me different to that. I know it. It's a certainty. It's huge. I mean, the difference. I just suggest you do it. If you're used to being around lots of electromagnetic fields, especially mobile phones and smart meters and all these things, make a point of going out into nature, somewhere ideally as far away as you can from any cell phone towers or anything like that. Ideally by water, ideally in a not polluted area, which might be hard, but try to find the cleanest area you can. And just sit for an hour or half an hour and feel the difference. Really feel it, and you will notice. Unprecedented human exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic radiation from conception until death has been occurring in the past 2 decades. Evidence of its effects on the CNS, including altered neurodevelopment and increased risk of some neurodegenerative diseases, is a major concern considering the steady increase in their incidence, which is more or less what I was just saying. Evidence exists for an association between neurodevelopmental or behavioural disorders in children and exposure to wireless devices, and experimental evidence, such as the Yale finding, shows that prenatal exposure could cause structural and functional changes in the brain associated with ADHD-like behaviour. These findings deserve urgent attention. At the Oceania Radiofrequency Scientific Advisory Association, an independent scientific organisation, volunteering scientists have constructed the world's largest categorised online database of peer-reviewed studies on radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation and other man-made electromagnetic fields of lower frequencies. A recent evaluation of 2,266 studies, including in vitro and in vivo studies in human, animal and plant experimental systems and population studies, found that most studies, n equals 1546, 68.2%, have demonstrated significant biological or health effects associated with exposure to anthropogenic electromagnetic fields. We have published our preliminary data on radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation, which shows that 89%, 216 of 242, of experimental studies that investigated oxidative stress endpoints showed significant effects. This weight of scientific evidence refutes the prominent claim that the deployment of wireless technologies poses no health risks at the currently permitted non-thermal radiofrequency exposure levels. Instead, the evidence supports the International EMF Scientist Appeal by 244 scientists from 41 countries who have published on the subject in peer-reviewed literature and collectively petitioned the World Health Organization and the United Nations for immediate measures to reduce public exposure to artificial electromagnetic fields and radiation. Evidence also exists of the effects of radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation on flora and fauna. For example, the reported global reduction in bees and other insects is plausibly linked to increased radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation in the environment. Honeybees are among the species that use magnetoreception, which is sensitive to anthropogenic electromagnetic fields for navigation. So in other words, bees use electromagnetic fields to know where they are, and it causes them a lot of trouble when we fill their signals up with noise. Man-made electromagnetic fields range from extremely low frequency associated with electricity supplies and electrical appliances to low, medium, high and extremely high frequency, mostly associated with wireless communication. The potential effects of these anthropogenic electromagnetic fields on natural electromagnetic fields, such as the Schumann resonance that controls the weather and climate, have not been properly studied. Similarly, we do not adequately understand the effects of anthropogenic radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation on other natural and man-made atmospheric components or the ionosphere. It has been widely claimed that radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation, being non-ionizing radiation, does not possess enough photon energy to cause DNA damage. This has now been proven wrong experimentally. Radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation causes DNA damage apparently through oxidative stress, similar to near UV radiation, which was also long thought to be harmless. At a time when environmental health scientists tackle serious global issues such as climate change and chemical toxicants and public health, there is an urgent need to address so-called electrosmog. A genuine evidence-based approach to the risk assessment and regulation of anthropogenic electromagnetic fields will help the health of us all, as well as that of our planetary home. Some government health authorities have recently taken steps to reduce public exposure to radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation by regulating use of wireless devices by children and recommending preferential use of wired communication devices in general, but this ought to be a coordinated international effort. We declare no competing interests, and we thank Alastair Phillips for assistance with the figure, and Victor Leach and Steve Weller for assistance with the ORSAA database, which has enabled our overview of the scientific evidence in this area of research. And then we have a bunch of references here going through various different scientific studies that they've linked, NASA, all kinds of sources. And this is only really a small percentage, as it says there. They referenced over 200 studies there which show that this is the case. I've seen other ones as well, going back probably longer than these ones. So yeah, when people claim that, it's been debunked, mobile phone, cell phone technology is completely safe, no, it hasn't. You're wrong. Unless you actually studied these many studies and listen to these scientists and what they have to say, and you are basically able to understand it and respond on a level that they've put forward. In other words, to the degree of data and certainty and research and understanding that these people have, unless you can do that, then you're not in a position to know whether you're right or wrong, and you're basically probably just believing what you've been told. So, can I personally prove to you that a Wi-Fi signal or a mobile phone signal may, or lots of them even over time, might cause you cancer? It would be difficult for me to do that because I don't have in front of me the equipment in a laboratory to measure these things accurately. I know that there are tests and things that people have done with plants, and they show that, and animals and bees, that show that these beings have a real problem in the presence of these fields. So maybe that would be something that people could do at home to demonstrate to themselves. But I think basically with this, it's something, the technology that you're using, smartphones and so on, it wasn't a natural thing. It's not like you just naturally got it and you understand it. It was the result of a lot of time and research and scientific work to produce those devices that now we kind of take for granted. And I think it would be a mistake to think that you can understand everything about them without applying a similar level of understanding regarding the science involved. Basically, if someone gives you a gun, maybe it's a good idea to learn about guns so you don't kill yourself. And there's quite a lot you can learn about guns, I'm sure, but they're not that complicated. If someone gives you a computer that's more powerful than the computer that allegedly was involved in landing, men on the moon, assuming they went there, then if someone gives you that and says, hey, you can talk to someone in Australia without any wires easily, that's quite relatively advanced technology compared to what humanity's had, and it'd be a mistake to just assume that this is somehow awfully easy to understand, simple, and we can just approach it with the same kind of logic we would approach, old school technology that would run through cables. Oh yeah, there's nothing to worry about, it's just another evolution of technology. Well, these things use quite different technology to what we've had before, and I really suggest everybody who uses this technology take some time out to really pay attention to what you've got involved with, because I can guarantee you one thing: most of the people in the governments haven't got, even though they don't have a clue about this stuff, and they bought into the lies of the industry, just like the smoking industry, the tobacco industry lied for so long about the safety risks of smoking. I'm 99.9% sure that the manufacturers of this technology are also lying in a similar way. And you can watch the video from when the FAA's in America, is it the FAA? FCC, I think it is, government sort of agent. They had a press conference announcing the rollout of 5G technology, and I recommend everyone watch that. I'll link it under this video. I've never seen anything like it. Basically, he went out and said to a press conference to professional, press people, basically 5G is great. We're rolling it out. We don't have time for safety tests. We're just rolling it out. And then a professional reporter sort of asked a question and said, well, we've just heard last week that there was some concerns about health issues relating to this technology. Can you sort of comment on that and talk about safety testing and so on? And they threw him out. They literally took him out. The guy had the security team come out and remove that person, that official journalist, from the room for asking that question. I will also say that person from the government literally reminded me of a German Nazi. He actually looked like one. He acted like one. I've honestly never seen anything like it, and it's very disturbing when you see that. And then you look at this science and you think, basically, the corrupt government in America and probably in many other places, completely corrupted. And I don't think this is just a question of them being bought off, although it might be to some extent. I think there's more to this than just money. I think there are plans to use this electrosmog for certain practical purposes in social control and social engineering, which is a massive subject in itself. And it's very easy to start sounding paranoid and crazy when people hear you talk about these things who haven't done their research into it. But I can assure you that there's a huge wealth of research on using microwave technology for weaponry purposes, for defense purposes, for shielding purposes, and history shows us that the people who are chasing power will do virtually anything to kind of increase their personal power. And yeah, don't be surprised if you suddenly find out that the towers, cell phone towers, well, let's just put it like this. Don't be surprised if at some point you learn that more engineers start talking the same as some of the whistleblower engineers that I've heard talking about, saying that the amount of energy that's used in cell phone towers is massively higher than it needs to be to run the technology that is actually meant to be up there. And that there are boxes in the top of cell phone towers that the actual engineers that installed the towers aren't even allowed to go into, and they have Official Secrets Act protection, which means that there is technology in cell phone towers, according to whistleblowers, which is top secret and which draws a lot of electricity. So with that in mind, maybe we should pay more attention to it. So yeah, I do my best to look at this in a level-headed, neutral way, just looking at the evidence, and I've looked at a lot of evidence. The difference between me and a lot of people is that when it comes to things like this, is that I spend a lot of my time looking into the evidence of this stuff. It's not just something I read on a web page and then think, oh yeah, that's probably true. I have a lot of time available to do this kind of stuff, and I do spend a lot of time reading studies, going back 50 years, talking to people involved in it, in the industry, listening to them from a lot of different angles. So yeah, please, if you're going to comment on this, without being rude, don't waste my time. At least spend some time looking into it before you comment. So with that, yeah, thanks for listening, and let's hope that more and more people get aware of this and consider turning off the Wi-Fi, consider turning off their cell phone, and let's go back to some old-fashioned cables. There's nothing wrong with them. You get a faster internet connection at home with that anyway at the moment. And yeah, it will be a lot better for your health, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, much love to all, and peace until next time, and I will see you soon. Cheers.